What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com coming back at y'all today with another post-game reaction video. Back at it this weekend after I was out last weekend, but got a lot of good stuff to talk about after Texas downs Baylor. Number 3 Texas wins 38-6 in Waco. What will likely be the final meeting between these two teams in Waco, at least for a very, very, very long time. And the final meeting between these two teams is Big 12 foes. Again, Texas comes up with a 38-6 win. This game probably should have been more lopsided. Granted, both teams had some miscues late. Baylor could not put the ball in the end zone when they had the ball. I think it was at least a half dozen times inside Texas's 25-yard line. Texas had some special teams miscues, 2 fumbled punts, and then missed a close 26-yard field goal, probably the worst miss of Bert Auburn's career so far. But again, wasn't necessary for Texas to win this game. Just would have been nice to see them execute on special teams a little bit better. A few other notes from this game. Texas outgains Baylor 503 total yards to 365 for the Bears. Passing yards are a little bit closer, 328 to 305 for Baylor. Baylor was able to hit some deep balls in this game. Rushing yards is where it was pretty decisive edge for Texas, 175 to 60 for Baylor. Texas only penalized twice in this game for 20 yards, so nice to see the discipline holding up pretty well. Honestly, thought there probably could have been more calls against Baylor, but that's neither here nor there at this point. I think both teams only combined for 41 penalty yards, so not many flags thrown in this game. Again, at least on offense, especially on defense, didn't have a ton of miscues. When they did, team responded really well. That's kind of been a consistent theme this season. That whenever a player, whether it be like Jaron Thompson getting burned on the deep ball against Alabama, then coming back with the interception. Quinn Ewers in this game having a near interception, staring down CJ Baxter on a screen pass, and then coming back with like a 29-yard touchdown run. I believe that was the following play. Just 2 great examples this season of players just coming right back and being able to respond. Texas moves to 4-0 on the season after getting this win in the Big 12 opener over Baylor. Baylor falls to 1-3 and then 0-1 in the Big 12. It's been a rough start to the season for the Bears. Just a couple of other notes that I had. This is one of 2 games for Baylor where they have not scored a touchdown since 2000 or since the start of the 2021 season. The other coming last year against Kansas State, where they only scored 3 points. Texas's defense again does really, really well. 5 sacks, I believe 8 tackles for loss. And then held Baylor to, I believe it was, around 4.3 yards per play. But again, Baylor had some late yards that they were able to pick up in this game. Texas keeps on rolling. I think this was their most impressive performance of the season outside of the Alabama game. There wasn't a ton that Quinn Ewers had to do in this game, but he finishes up 18 of 23, 293 yards, 1 touchdown pass, and then also had 1 touchdown run. So not the biggest statistical game for him, and he was really good. Connected on a couple of deep balls, including a really, really nice throw to Jonte Cook late in this one. Jonathan Brooks was a star in this game again. 18 carries, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also had, I believe it was 1 or 2 catches. 1 catch for 18 yards, a nice one-handed catch on a kind of a reverse screen pass. Went down the sideline, set Texas up inside the 10-yard line, which would eventually lead to the first rushing touchdown of CJ Baxter Jr.'s career. It was nice to see him back in this game. He missed the Wyoming game with a lower body injury. He was still pretty limited in this game. 6 carries, 21 yards, and a touchdown. Also had, I believe, 2 catches for 17 yards. So getting him back involved in limited capacity, I'm sure we'll see more of him against Kansas next weekend. In the receiving game, the star of this one was hands down junior tight end JT Sanders. He was a matchup nightmare for the Bears in this one. 5 catches, 110 yards. The second 100-plus yard receiving game of the season for Sanders. I believe at this point he leads the FBS in receiving yards. He got 268 on the season. He's been awesome this year. 62 yards after the catch in this game. Absolutely crazy. His best play, easily that one-handed catch down the seam, where I think he picked up like 40 yards after the catch or something like that, maybe 35. He was awesome tonight. I can't say enough good stuff about him. Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy combined for 6 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Worthy had a second half touchdown in this one. Xavier Worthy also gets a 35-yard touchdown. A 35-yard pass to JT Sanders. That one almost went for a touchdown. Worthy now has a few nice passes in his career, so that's been a nice little trick up Stark's sleeve the last few years. On defense, again, I'll talk more about the defense in a second, but just from looking at the stat sheet, some of the game notes, they completely controlled the line of scrimmage. Texas comes up with, I believe, 5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, over a half dozen plays of 0 or negative yards for Baylor in this game. Baylor couldn't really get anything running the ball. They averaged, I think it was around 3.5 yards per carry. And the defensive line, led by T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Vernon Broughton, they were awesome. Byron Murphy had himself a career night. I believe like 4 solo tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss. T'Vondre Sweat had 4 combined tackles, a couple of quarterback pressures, 1 tackle for loss. Also had a batted ball, kind of a trademark of his at this point. But you had a lot of different guys getting involved, pressuring the quarterback in this one. Again, Broughton had a sack. Jett Bush had the first sack of this game. And then Justice Finkley actually had a sack, I believe the first solo sack of his career. That was on a red zone possession that Baylor had late in the game. Forced a turnover on downs. If you're crowning the defensive player of the game for Texas, it's probably between Jalen Ford and Byron Murphy. There's a whole host of guys you could give it to, but Jalen Ford, 8 combined tackles, team high, 1 tackle for loss, multiple defensive stops, also had that key red zone interception. Got 2 interceptions on the season now. I believe that makes it 6 in the last 9 games for him. So he continues to be on a tear, continues to look like the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year eventually, and the award that he should have gotten last season as well, because I think he was absolutely robbed of that last year. You saw Maurice Blackwell return to this game. He had a couple of nice plays. Again, I mentioned Jett Bush. You saw David Benda have a nice game. I thought Malik Muhammad, Derek Williams came in and gave Texas a lot of nice reps. They each had a pass breakup that were either on 3rd or 4th downs. And so, Texas continuing to rotate guys, continuing to show off their depth pretty much at all positions. Because Jalen Catalon, he's been rotating at safety, and I think he had some nice run. I think 1 run stop, and played decently well. But they've been rotating him to try to keep him fresh and healthy. And so you're seeing guys more like Keaton Crawford and Michael Taft in the game often. So, like I said, all around solid game for Texas, especially up front. So let's get into some of the post-game takeaways that I had, and then we'll crown, as I usually do, some of the studs, some of the guys that deserve a lot of credit coming out of this one. And then I want to focus on a few key areas Texas needs to improve, and then what's next, because Texas has some big games coming up on the schedule. So I already got my takeaways piece up at the site. I'll link that in the description below as always. There were a few things I wanted to highlight. One, I thought the offensive line played pretty well, but I thought that there were some maybe miscommunications, miscues early resulted in, I think Texas gave up 3 sacks and then had a couple additional pressures. But after Dave Aranda got some early pressure, kind of schemed up some nice simulated pressures and twists and stunts up front. Texas started to figure it out, and they were really controlling the line of scrimmage on offense too. And Ewers had a lot of time to throw for most of this game. I got to give it to the offensive line. The tackles played really, really well. As always, Kelvin Banks and Christian Jones stout at left and right tackle. I did see Christian Jones leave the game late with an injury. They mentioned something about it briefly. Don't know how serious it is, but Cam Williams did get some work at right tackle, so we'll keep an eye on that. Kelvin Banks had a really nice block. I think he came on. He was covering a double team. Baylor sent 2 guys his way, and he was still able to seal the edge for Quinn Ewers to be able to get to the outside and score on his 29-yard touchdown run. The interior offensive line, again, I thought that there were some miscues early, but they played pretty well throughout the final 45 minutes of this game. So got to give some credit there. We didn't see any penalties, which was an issue, especially for Hayden Connor last week. So also nice to see Texas clean that up. Again, I think the offensive line looked really, really good. They've played really well in the 2 road games against Power 5 opponents this season. Also keep in mind, again, Texas did give up 3 sacks in this game, so that's not really where you want to be. But I think that Texas gave up 5 sacks last season when Baylor came to DKR, and Dave Aranda would kind of set the blueprint for how to get pressure on Quinn Ewers. Again, with a lot of those different simulated pressures, some of those ghost fronts, and Texas they almost pretty much cut that number in half in this game. Almost did 60% of the sacks allowed that they had last season against Baylor. So good to see from them. Hopefully we continue to see kind of that upward trek because Kansas coming in next weekend has a fast defense. Has I think played pretty well in the first few weeks of this season, including this weekend against BYU. I also want to talk about the backfield situation. Jonathan Brooks, CJ Baxter Jr. I know a lot has been made of CJ Baxter kind of being the potential starter as the season progresses, but I think Jonathan Brooks has kind of put a lot of that conversation to bed, at least for now. I think Jonathan Brooks is a solid RB1. He's had back-to-back 100 rushing yard games. Over 250 rushing yards the last 2 games combined. He was really, really solid in this one, making a lot of Baylor defenders miss. At this point, he's got at least 15 missed tackles forced the last 2 weeks. He led the Power 5 among running backs in missed tackles forced last week. He'll probably be up there again this weekend. I don't think he'll be number 1, but he was making a lot of guys miss coming out of the backfield. Again, had a really nice catch in this game. I thought he did a decent job blocking and just proving to be a solid all-around back. I think Texas, as Baxter gets healthier, will continue to mix him in more and more. But I don't think there's any need to rush him back right now. I don't think there was a need to rush him back, especially for this game with Texas getting up the way they did. But with the games you got coming up, you got Kansas next weekend, OU in 2 weekends. I think that they'll find other ways to get Baxter involved. He's a really nice change of pace back with Brooks. Baxter more of like he hits the hole incredibly fast. Brooks more of like an elusive guy that can make a lot of guys miss in the open field, and Baxter just kind of put that head down and just kind of run over you. That bell cow back that we know Sark loves so infamously. Next thing I wanted to talk about here is the defensive line. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I already talked about them a lot, but this defensive line has absolutely wreaked havoc on pretty much every team's backfield that they played this season. I think Wyoming did a pretty good job of holding up last week, but outside of that, Texas got 5 sacks against Alabama, tied a season high or a single game high, whatever, for sacks. This weekend had 5. Early in this game, it seemed like every single play, Sawyer Robertson was having the pocket collapse in on him. And, I know that this was kind of a shaky Baylor offensive line. They'd allowed nearly 30 quarterback pressures, worst in the Big 12 during non-conference play. But, Texas, give them a ton of credit, got a lot of different guys involved in the pass rushing. And I think you had 4 different guys with sacks in this game. And then, just the pressure was nonstop. And so, Texas, the way they are up front right now, the way that they're able to rotate, the amount of talent and depth that's here, I think this is easily the best defensive line in the Big 12. I put in my takeaways piece and I kind of stick to it. I think this is probably one of the 3 or 4 best defensive lines in the country. Texas able to stymie the ground game the way they did. This is a Baylor team that has a lot of physical running backs, a lot of talented guys. Dominic Richardson is no stranger to contact in the trend, or working through the trenches, and Richard Reese, also a very elusive guy. And I think Pendergrass is also going to be a solid back at Baylor for a while, but Texas was able to severely limit their production on the ground. T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, a lot of these big guys up front. These are NFL level guys, I think. I think Broughton will get there, but Sweat, Murphy, Collins, they're already there. So all hats off to that group up front. They're, I think, leading this Texas defense right now along with Jalen Ford. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here before getting to naming some additional studs and areas of improvement for Texas moving forward, I think that I really got to laud Sark for the way that this team has continued to perform in the second half. Texas, they got some of the, they got some backups and some younger players in the fourth quarter, and you had some of the special teams miscues in the second half where Texas probably left some points on the board, but I think all in all, Texas has looked like a completely different team in the second half this year. They've won each second half they played this season by a combined margin of 48 points. This is the largest margin of victory in the second half through 4 games for any Sark coach team on the 40 so far. So that's over the course of 3 seasons now. And Texas just isn't giving any leeway really in the second half in any of these games outside of, I think, kind of a down third quarter against Alabama. But Texas came right back in the fourth quarter of that game and won it 21-8. You saw them last weekend against Wyoming winning 21-0, and this weekend they win the third quarter 10-0. Get some of the backups in the fourth, and things kind of slow down a little bit, but. The point is that this Texas team, you don't really have to worry about these double-digit leads in the second half anymore. Texas is able to run the ball well enough to, at least possess the ball enough, and the defense is taking care of business when it matters. And so, Sark has this team bought into the vision, and the amount of talent and depth, again, that I mentioned earlier with the defense, but just across the board, the amount of talent and depth that Texas has, you don't have to worry about guys getting tired over the course of the game. Texas can rotate different guys in and make sure they stay fresh and ready to go for the fourth quarter. And you're seeing the fruits of that labor now coming about. Sark, I think I think he did a better job of managing the second half of games last season, but really completely flipped the script this year. You don't really have to worry about those second half leads anymore. And then to wrap this up, again, I want to kind of talk about some additional players that I thought stood out in this game. I've mentioned a lot of guys already, but a few other ones I want to pinpoint. Anthony Hill, I thought, was really solid down the stretch in this one. You're starting to see them expand his role a little bit at that weak side linebacker spot. He came up with 6 combined tackles, had a couple of defensive stops in this one. I thought he had a really nice string of plays in the second half where I believe you saw him make back-to-back defensive stops, including a nice read on a run stuff. And, for him, it's just about kind of learning right now and soaking all this up. And, I think that PK is doing a nice job of finding different ways to scheme him up in the pass rush when necessary. But, Hill's starting to, I think he's kind of starting to figure out, contesting space better, figuring out what to do in coverage, reading the ball carrier better and things like that. And so, he's definitely on an upward trajectory right now, and the sky is really the limit for him. On offense, I've mentioned a lot of guys already. JT Sanders is one that comes to mind. It was nice to see Malik Murphy get in this game. But, I've mentioned it before. I really do think this was a nice outing from Quinn Ewers. He did what he needed to do. I think there have been some misses on the deep ball this season, sure, but in the last 3 weeks, he really hasn't missed a ton. Again, 18 to 23 in this game, had a couple of nice deep ball connections, and in the short and intermediate passing game, he was money. He made some really, really nice throws, especially down the seam. Found some guys out in the flats. He was making quick decisions, getting through his reads. He faced some early pressure in this game, and he wasn't getting phased, I think, is a big thing to take away here. It's just a night and day difference. If you remember the Baylor game last year, Quinn Ewers gets phased early in the game. I guess to some degree, rightly so. He's still a freshman, and he had 5 sacks. And Sark has to kind of condense the game plan, condense the playbook. Started having to rely more on Bijan Robinson and Rashawn Johnson to shoulder the load on offense. But in this one, Texas allows some early pressure. Quinn kind of regroups. Has his head on straight, stays composed, hits some big throws. He had that big 29-yard touchdown run, and Texas is in business. So, you're really seeing the development of Quinn Ewers not only as a more composed quarterback, but just as a better leader of this offense, someone that really is setting the tone and keeping things stabilized. And that's going to be huge this season. And then, I did want to mention a few things for Texas to improve upon from here on out. One thing, Texas did get beat over the top a couple of times on the deep ball. Baylor kind of picked on Ryan Watts. One was a deep pass to Monterey Baldwin, I believe another one to Keytron Jackson early in this game on the boundary. I'm not sounding the alarm or anything on these plays, but I would like to see Texas getting a little bit more help over the top. They are getting beat deep. I believe that's at least 2 deep balls that they've gotten beat on in both their road games now against Power 5 opponents. And so it's just something to watch moving forward, something to clean up. Kansas is a team that can get some guys over the top for some 20-25 yard completion, at least in terms of air yards. Jalen Daniels is a really solid quarterback they're going to be facing next weekend. And I think Dylan Gabriel's at least an efficient quarterback that Texas will be facing in 2 weeks. Granted, I do have questions about his deep ball. And then, on special teams, that's the obvious area of improvement. Ryan Sanborn has been a really solid punter for Texas this season. I think there were a few that he could have angled a little bit better, had a little bit more hang time on. He had the longest active streak of Power 5 punters of punts without a touchback. That ended this game, I believe it was at 75. And then the elephant in the room for special teams, you had those 2 miscues, one drop punt from Xavier Worthy and then one from Jordan Whittington. I got to think, the ball was kind of wobbly. It was moving around all weird and, kind of getting lost in the lights, but you can't be dropping 2 consecutive punts. I don't really know what the answer is for Texas on the return team. You've had a couple of muff punts from Worthy, and Whittington's first one he goes back there, he muffs. Getting some other guys involved here. Maybe you get Jonte Cook. I think he's a capable returner. DeAndre Moore, someone that's done that before. Niblett too. I don't know if you would try. Throwing Niblett in there at this point would probably be a little premature, but I think you probably got to try some other guys out in practice, but find something to clean up these special teams miscues, because these next 2 games you got coming up are absolutely massive. Texas next weekend has Kansas at home. This is going to be a big recruiting weekend. Texas already has a couple of guys, I think a couple of really big guys coming in for official visits. You got DeAndre Carter, 4-star Auburn interior offensive line commit that I believe is coming in next weekend. Weston Davis, high 4-star Texas A&M committed offensive tackle. Potentially Solomon Williams, 4-star edge rusher. I'm sure we're going to hear about a lot more guys that are coming in on official visits next weekend. This could be a top 25 game at DKR. Kansas, I think, it's deserving. They're undefeated, 4-0, coming in as a top 25 team. And the following weekend, you got an OU team that is definitely going to be ranked in the top 25, top 20 for Red River. I think a better OU team than Texas faced last season. They're going to have Dillon and Gabriel healthy, so that already makes them a better team, and I think the defense looks a lot better for them. And so for Texas, some of these miscues you had in this game, again, those deep balls, the special teams mistakes, you're going to have to clean those up before you get into playing what could be 2 of the other best teams in the Big 12 in Kansas and OU. So, that's pretty much it. Again, I don't want to focus too much on the negative here because Texas came up with another big win this weekend, and things are looking really positive for this team moving forward. So for Andrew Miller, Hook'emHeadlines.com, that's pretty much it. Hook 'em.